And I just made up Dr. Kevorkian, and then I wrote the rap music to Dr. Dre's rap music on one of the documents they took in. I did that intentionally because knowing this would probably go to trial or there would be hearings. And the doctor's like, well, I can't prescribe this to you without documentation. They hand the documentation over. It goes in the patient file, but it's the rap music.
Well, sure, he never read it.
They never read them.
Yeah.
They don't go over them. And I also sent undercovers in with my dog's x-ray. There's a tail on there. Humans don't have tails. So
I love it.
Those were really fun when they went to trial, and they're like, well, Ms. Herkert, can you show what this exhibit is? Well, yes, that is an x-ray of my dog.
Hey, everybody, welcome back for part 2 of our interview with Susannah Herkert, former DEA Diversion Investigator who's still involved in that realm. We're going to get into what she's doing now a little bit later. This lady is a studette times 2. I'm impressed with everything I know about her, what I've heard about her, what she's talked about already in episode 1. If you didn't see episode 1, go back and listen to it. It sets the groundwork as to what we're going to talk about today. One of the things that we talked about in episode 1 was her... I'm going to say it's an infatuation with Amelia Earhart, because she got interested in that at a very young age, and she's probably a leading expert on the real Amelia Earhart and some of the access to people who were associated with Amelia Earhart in her life. I don't know anybody else that had that kind of access, so it's really interesting. And I just realized that I was telling you about when we went over to Micronesia for our 5th trip. It was my 2nd trip to Micronesia, and that was in April of this year, 24. And this was called Expedition 5. And I just realized I've got the shirt on it was a free t-shirt. So our regular listeners, I'm into free 99 is Murph. That's me. I love free t-shirts. I love t-shirts, but I really love free t-shirts. If you got any you want to send out there, I'll send you a post office box where you can send that to. Just send me an email. But it's ironic how all this comes about. Was that fate? What things happen for a reason, right?
Yes,
so... Now, we just finished in the last episode, we just finished talking to Susannah about Michael Jackson, and you told me you're part of the investigation, or just tell our listeners what you told me about that part of it.
Sure. So I was involved more in the pharmacy, Mickey Fine Pharmacy in Beverly Hills, California, that was filling the prescriptions associated with that matter, and so did inspection warrants out there. And at the time, Billy Bodner was my ASAC, and he was out there with us. And doctors write the prescriptions, but somebody has to fill them. And we had a role in reviewing it at the farm.
Yeah, and I smile when you said Billy, because I've known Billy for quite a while. Now that he's retired, I got to get him on the show here.
Yes. How did I luck out? He was one of my first ASACs in Los Angeles. So
he's such a good guy.
Huge role in letting me run around and helping me and saving me when I needed saving.
Yeah. That's what I used to say. My first boss in DEA, I won't mention his name here. He was, this will explain it all. He said, listen, if you get in trouble and you're right, I got your back all the way. If you're wrong, look out. Well, if I'm right, I don't need your help. It's when I'm wrong that I made an honest mistake that I'll need your backing. So that just says all about his.
Isn't that the truth?
But Bodner he's kind of a legend at DEA. I think he did his whole entire career in Los Angeles, made it all the way up special agent in charge.
Yes.
Love the guy. Now, in 2010, you transferred to Dallas, and why? Was that something you wanted, or what was going on?
Yes,
with that?
It was closer to home, closer to Oklahoma, and just seemed like the next option there. And I thought, hey, I've done cases in Los Angeles. It's going to be easy in Dallas. Well, it's really easy, but it was just another experience that I was looking forward to.
When you were in LA, did you encounter any pill mills?
Yes, that was kind of my. I started doing pill mills as soon as I got there. And when I say pill mills, these were the early 2000 type pill mills where there were lines of 20 to 25-year-olds outside of doctors' offices. And they were there with their cash, waiting to get Oxycontin 80 milligram, Oxycodone 30, the Roxys, had their cash in hand, and they were getting prescriptions. And so I developed relationships with agents because they go undercover. Diversion investigators do not. And so I had a whole group of just amazing agents that I would send in undercover day in and day out. to these clinics. And the agents and I have always gone back and forth because when the first time they saw one of my arrest/search warrants, they're like, "You have a table of contents on that?" And I was, "What? You guys do too?" And they're like, no, that is weird. And they're like, "It's 109 pages." And I'm, "Well, how long are yours?" And they're like, 14 pages, maybe. And I was like, wait a second, because I didn't know the difference, right? I thought everybody had a table of contents. And I think it was in that moment that I was like, yeah, this might be a lot. But in working with the prosecutors, the amount of evidence that you have to take down somebody who's the pillar of the community. These are doctors. These are people who went to Yale. These are people who, went to Ivy League schools and have that background and that education. So to prove a case for them for a Title 21 unlawful distribution, you have in your head what you think you need for evidence. You multiply that by 10, and you might be close.
Yeah, because they're going to bring in not one defense attorney. They're going to bring in an army of defense attorneys because they've got the financial resources.
Exactly. And they're going to fight you till the ends of the earth. And everyone was like, Susannah, cases never go to trial. Like 10% of cases go to trial. Well, I made up that quota for all of DEA. Because I always went to trial, it seemed like. But it was such an educational experience. But doing those pill mills, and I learned every time I did one, something different and how to build that evidence. But, did a bunch of the pill mills, and a lot of them were highly publicized due to the nature of it. I mean, these are people who had a great reputation in their community. And to see them taken down for selling, the party-sized bottles of hydrocodone or Vicodin in their office, it shocked people. And so it got a lot of attention in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I want to say something right here that I have a subscriber channel, a Patreon subscriber channel that goes along here with Game of Crimes with Murph in the Morning. And I just did an episode on pain medications and kind of tied into that. And so our listeners, the reason I'm saying this is don't look at any of this as us pointing the finger of those of you that actually need pain medications. That's not what this is all about. What we're talking about in these diversion cases is how doctors who took an oath, a Hippocratic oath, to take care of all of us because of their education and the licenses that they have and their experience, they violate that oath, and it all becomes about money. It's got nothing to do whatsoever with our health. And like Susannah has said here a couple times, this is a very, very small percentage of the medical field. It's just like in law enforcement. We got a very small percentage of cops that go rogue, but it makes us all look bad. So we're not condemning the medical field. I'm certainly not condemning anybody that has legitimate need for pain medications. Okay. So I just want to get that out there. Some of my regular listeners, they suffer from chronic pain. And I don't think, Susan, I'm going to guess that you'll agree to this. I don't think anybody should live with chronic pain.
Absolutely not. And that was too, because these pill mills and the small percentage of doctors are doing it are taking away the ability for people who have legitimate pain to get access often to these controlled substances. So there's a lot going on here.
It is. So I want to throw that out there because our devoted listeners that have been following us for years and years here, just want you to understand that certainly not talking about you at all. I mean, I'll even go to the point that I've never smoked marijuana. Okay. I've never found a legitimate medical report that says marijuana has a legitimate medicinal purpose. However, and my oldest son is an orthopedic surgeon, so I tap on him occasionally, do some research for me, see if you can find something new come out that I'm not aware of. And I'll log on every once in a while to the computer and just see if I can find anything new. And there's nothing out there. Now, these lobby groups that promote the legalization of marijuana, they'll tell you, oh, this is all based on these credible medical investigations. But they never provide a link so that you can read that investigation. And if you look and look and look, and I've done it over and over, haven't found it yet. But having said all that, I have some listeners that say they smoke weed and it helps with their chronic pain. If it helps you to get rid of that pain, it does not bother me in the least that you smoke marijuana, because I just don't believe anybody should live and suffer from chronic pain. If that gives you some relief, and I know people are going to take this out of context, but if smoking weed does that for you, I'm in favor of it. I do not have a problem with it. Okay, so back to our regular scheduled program here, because I just feel a responsibility to those that continually support the show and support me on Patreon and all the other things they do to keep me running. This is running a podcast is a hell of a lot of work, more work than I ever anticipated, with editing and just all the things that are involved with it. And these people are loyal, so I want to be loyal to them as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you go to Dallas. You're now in a tactical diversion squad there in Dallas.
Yes.
And is that where you met this guy I keep talking to, Billy Matthews?
Yes. So he had the unfortunate timing of being my supervisor there in Dallas. So I think the statute of limitations has run out. I'm outside of DEA. He survived it. I think I'm probably responsible for his hair turning gray. But no, like,
let me tell you, he thinks you walk on water. The email he sent reconnecting us, and you saw that, but talking to him privately as well, he thinks the world of you. So all tongue in cheek here.
Yeah. No, and that's just, I think my entire DEA career is I had some phenomenal agents that invested in my career and how to do cases from the criminal aspect, and then marrying up that diversion background, which was just such a recipe for success in taking those. And that's what was really our ability as a team, as a tactical diversion, to take down these doctors, pharmacies, corporations, because of that team.
Mm-hmm. Out of curiosity, because they started the TDSs, I think, after I had already moved back to Washington in the last few years of my career. How many people comprise a tactical diversion squad group, or the group you were in Dallas? Mm-hmm. And what's the makeup? Agents, analysts, diversion investigators, support staff, all that?
So it's typically 1 to 2 diversion investigators, usually about 3 to 4 agents, maybe 1 or 2 intel analysts, and then usually a handful of task force officers. And in Dallas, my partner, who actually Bill brought in, was a sheriff's office there locally, and he was a former doctor. And so, what? Yes, and so he was a doctor who had great success as a doctor, and then ultimately his passion was law enforcement. So he became a deputy sheriff, and Bill found out about him and was like, this is going to be the perfect partner for Susannah. And so there's nothing better than having a doctor turned cop help me go after doctors who were violating that oath. And so we just had a phenomenal time, because putting all of that together, and we're really able to go after doctors, pharmacies, and corporations there in Dallas as a result of that team.
I've heard of other occupations that professional careers where, like a lawyer, prosecutor, somebody like that will drop out and become a police officer. I've never heard of a doctor.
Yes. No, it was phenomenal. The smartest guy I've ever worked with, and using his abilities and his analytical abilities and background. I mean, our 110-page search warrants, arrest warrants, I think turned into 200-page ones once he was on the team. And we really just use those resources. And it was matchmaking him to go after these targets.
Nice. Well, I mean, what a dynamic duo there. That's credit to Billy's observations of how to run a group, his leadership abilities. That you put your two, the best team you can get, in my opinion, is an agent and an analyst. When they can get along, set their egos aside. I mean, it's just a dynamic duo. There's no stronger team, and it sounds like that was there. And I wanted to mention too that I've read a lot of wiretap affidavits. I've only done one wiretap my whole career, and it's terrible. But there are guys who are experts, especially in LA. They were known for their wiretaps. I've rarely seen affidavits that are more than 100 pages long, and you're talking about yours are up to 200. Wow.
Well, yes, and I did my first wiretap, so I was the fine on my first Title III in Dallas on one of these cases, and they're like, everyone's like, Susannah, Title III, that's a lot of writing. Are you ready for this? And I wrote it, and I was like, it's not bad. It's like 80 pages.
Yeah.
So I think having that history with the arrest and search warrants with the pill mills, a Title III, was a lot of writing, but it was no different than what I had been doing, with all of the evidence needed for the undercover investigations and the data analysis involved in these pill mills.
Well, and let me tell you, you probably saw this firsthand, but when agents find out that somebody's willing to write affidavits, they will become your best friend.
Oh, yes. I was the typing person. I would sit there at that desk and, 9 hours would go by, right? And I loved to write the affidavits. I loved doing the table of contents. I loved putting everything together, because my approach, and this is what I trained the investigators at Quantico, is you have to appeal to the prosecutor, and you have to prepare it like it's going to trial every single time. And they're like, it's overboard. I'm like, no, it's not. because that's going to help get you to the finish line.
Exactly. Plus,
the public.
You've got to send it to DOJ for their review.
Yes.
There's a special section within DEA that reviews it. It's amazing how many reviews it goes through before it gets to the judge.
Exactly.
So it's, and plus your local prosecutor's got to go over it with you. So it's, if you're going to go in the game to win. Exactly.
And I wasn't going to have any defense attorney 6 months down the line pulling out a paragraph that was wrong or anything. So I really put the time in the beginning, pay off in the end.
Mm-hmm. While you were in Dallas, did you have any, like the Michael Jackson case, the pretty people, I like to call them, the famous people, I guess would be a better way to say it?
I don't know as much famous people as much as just a lot of investigations. It was in Dallas where I kind of transitioned from, I'm tired of the pill mill whack-a-mole. Every time I take down a doctor, I called it the kind of the pigeon effect. I would follow the prescription monitoring data to where the people seeking these prescriptions would find the dirty doctor. We'd take that dirty doctor down. I run those individuals' prescription data, and I would see the next doctor that's going to be these. And so it was this constant like whack-a-mole game. Mm-hmm. And it was in Dallas where we transitioned to, let's go up the food chain. Let's go after the pharmacies, the distributors, the corporations that have knowledge about these pill mill doctors and are continuing to supply these pharmacies and let these prescriptions go. That's where we kind of transitioned from pill mill whack-a-mole to let's go up and go after those who have knowledge that these prescriptions are not for legitimate reasons.
And that makes perfect sense because that's what you do in a criminal investigation. From the agent side, you want to take out an entire drug organization. You just don't want to take out one person.
Exactly. And working in the Eastern District of Texas, Joe Brown was the U.S. attorney, Heather Rattan, Josh Russ was the head of civil section. I mean, I had phenomenal federal prosecutors.
Nice.
I could not have asked for better federal prosecutors. I mean, I just feel like I had the luckiest career out there because everyone talks in law enforcement. Oh, I couldn't get anyone to take my case.
Yeah.
Couldn't find this, couldn't get that. It was the exact opposite. They were like, no, we're going to go after. The evidence is there. We're going to hold these individuals accountable. And I've never felt so just proud of the justice system, the prosecutors, the agents. I mean, everybody gave it their all. And when you have that kind of teamwork, and it's just knowing that, these communities, once these doctors and distributors and pharmacies are taken out, the illicit ones, what an impact that has on the community.
Mm-hmm. It's motivating. Makes you want to go to work every day.
Absolutely.
That's great. Javi and I were fortunate enough, I think it was before COVID, I'm pretty sure it was, the Eastern District of Texas, the U.S. Attorney's Office was holding a big conference. And we got to go and be some keynote speakers for it and, talked about the Escobar case. But those folks treated us from the day that we first showed up at the sign-in table, because we're only there for pretty much just one day. We fly in the day before, that evening, next day spend the day with them, next morning we're out. From the time we registered, they treated us like part of their team, treated us like family. The hospitality was just over the top. Everybody was interested. And then the speaking venue that night was the Dallas Cowboy football field, the stadium.
Now,
AT&T
I have a
Stadium.
picture of you from a prosecutor from the Eastern District that was there that night. And so they shared that with me, and what an amazing experience.
It was, they took us, you go into buses under the field. Well, actually, that's the level of the field. So we got to tour the locker rooms and all that stuff. And then when you come out of the stadium, coming out of that tunnel into the football field itself, they had a camera set up. And so everybody had to go through there. And then they had your picture on the big Jumbotron up top there. It's kind of silly, but it was really cool. It was like an experience.
Yes.
But whoever was running their speakers, they were serious.
Yes.
So they said, you've got this amount of time and we're going through our thing. And sometimes you get a little, carried away telling a story on one specific thing. And we hadn't even gotten to the takedown of Pablo Escobar. And the lady walked down on stage and said, sorry, your time's up. And we just turned around and walked off.
Yeah. Wow, that's intense.
Okay. I wasn't going to argue. I figured if she's got the guts to come out there and say that, I'm not going to fight her.
Exactly.
I'm scared of her.
Yeah. Oh.
Just a little side story there. But so you're on LinkedIn, and I was looking at your LinkedIn page there, and I read a story about a Dr. Daniel Healy.
Mm-hmm.
You remember him?
Yes.
This guy, you got to tell us about him, because this guy, you talk about a set of brass, what? Holy cow, the things he was doing.
Yeah, they called him Dr. Candyman. And he had been a doctor in the community for 20 plus years, well known in the community. His clinic was advertised. He had this big sign. This was in the Los Angeles area. It said weight loss, clinic. And this one, as most of our cases, came in from a tip. And I just remember being like, no, this can't be true. Because he was selling the actual bottles of controlled substances out of his clinic. So most doctors write the prescription or electronically send it over to the pharmacy. He was ordering the actual pills and dispensing directly to individuals. And so he had the party size or the family size. And this is why you have to have the amount of evidence, because you just don't believe it until you see it. And that's why every single one of our doctor cases, we interview the doctor during the search warrant, during that whole process. And going into DEA, I thought, there's no doctor that's going to speak to me. They're all going to lawyer up immediately, like they're doctors, right?
You'd think so, yeah.
No, nobody lawyered up. And so we were able to get them in their own words saying what they did and why they thought they could do it. And that was a pivotal part of a lot of our investigations, because it's one thing for me to say what happened or to write out the investigation, but to record them and play in their own words on it. And, 20 years ago, I just took my roller bag during the search warrant, right? And rolled in, and half the time I think they thought I was a pharmaceutical rep because they let me go straight in. And so I would sit down across from the doctor and tell him, I'm with DEA. And then halfway through the conversation, they're like, who did you say you're with again? Which company? No, I'm not a pharmaceutical rep. I'm with DEA. Now tell me again. And then it was like, wait a second. And so these interviews, and I was trained by agents a lot on interview techniques and how to elicit confessions and had a lot of on-the-job experience with these old school agents. And those were pivotal parts of our investigations. But same thing with Dr. Healy, Dr. Gondat, all of them is they were not doctors. I know they were licensed, they had a DEA registration, but as you said, these are the 0.01% of the doctors out there that just know semblance of patient care. Just, you want to buy a 500 count bottle? Great. It's $1,000. It's a drug deal. And so I think that's what was so shocking. And that's what Dr. Healy was doing. But, Dr. Healy was a deacon in his local church, mild-mannered, the white coat, the whole bit. So it's just really hard to wrap your head around how these things can happen. But 9 times out of 10, in my experience, it's motivated by greed. It's the money. It's quick.
And that's, pretty much in all of our investigations. I say this frequently, that we capitalize on that greed and that ego thing, because they just become so enamored with the money, but they also all of a sudden think they're more important than anybody else, that they're smarter than everybody else. I've never claimed to be the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree, but put a lot of criminals in jail.
Absolutely.
But this guy in particular, I went through and highlighted some of the things here. So I think, was it a journal that he kept that you found?
Yes.
And in the journal, he was interested in writing books. And the titles that were in there, I don't know if you remember them, so I highlighted them here. One of the perspective titles was "A Doctor Should Be Wealthy."
Yes.
Next is "Physician Entrepreneur." And another one was "The $1 Million Practice."
Yes. I remember the $1 Million Practice. And then you remember just during the search warrant and these and just going, is this for real? Like I cannot believe this happens. Yeah. I mean, he's one that did not go to trial, but he did get, I think he was around 4 years, or maybe longer on that. But and all of these doctors did significant federal time.
Well, do you remember the amount of hydrocodone pills he had ordered in 2008?
Oh gosh, it was over 1 million, I think.
Yeah, which was more than any other doctors and 10 times more than the average American pharmacy.
Yes. So it just glows. And that's what everyone's, and it was the same thing. Some of my other doctor cases, they were like the top prescriber for Adderall in the entire state of California. And they're West Hollywood psychiatrists. All of these red flags, from doing the data analysis just stand out. And then you just build your investigation around that. Like, why are they number one? It's not good to be number one in these situations.
And so if you were going into this doctor, this isn't, I'm not going to take your credit card. I'm not going to take a paper check. I want cash in hand, right?
Cash. And sometimes they would let you do, they would have payo sheets right at the front. So sometimes, because these physicians created addiction among these individuals. And sometimes they didn't have the money, but they wanted to keep them coming. So they would sometimes let them take 30 pills, put them on, you owe me sheet, and then they would have to bring the money back the next time before they got the balance. And there were just some really, and I think more than anything in LA to set the tone, because meeting with these families of these victims that, lost their 24-year-old to an overdose, it just resonated that these were families who did everything right and were trying to get their kids into treatment. And some of them were leaving treatment centers to go to these pill mills.
Yeah.
And these doctors knew what they were struggling with, still gave them that oxycodone that ultimately killed them. And it's just tragic.
That's nothing short of murder.
Yes. And that's why they were charged. We had the homicide charge in the Michael Jackson case, but in federal, it's the unlawful distribution resulting in death. And that distribution resulted in that individual's death. And the clause is but for the oxycodone, this person can still be alive. And that's what we had to prove. It was a 20-year mandatory minimum if we could get those unlawful distribution resulting in death. And so that's why a lot of these doctors got pretty significant sentences.
Did you guys find his money?
Yes, we typically found money at the clinics, bank accounts. I will tell you, during a lot of the interviews of the doctors, I'd be like, "Oh, wow, you're a doctor. You must make a lot of money." And they would just, "Oh, well, of course, I have, a yacht down here, and I have these 6 bank accounts, and I buy cattle and all this." And I'm like, the agents are outside listening, going, "Did he really just say that to her?"
Yeah.
And so I'd be like, "Well, I'm new here, and I don't have a bank. So which bank was that again?" "Oh, perfect." And then we'd go get our seizure warrants for those banks. And I call it the Don Blonde effect, right? But I could just sit across from them and chit chat, and they just love to brag about how much money they make and where their money's at. And we'll take all that information. Yes.
Great. I love it. You could just see these. I don't know how old these doctors were. Was their average age group?
I would say very rarely were they young. They were typically in their 50s, not the 50s. But
no, it's not. Believe me,
not at all. But yeah, they were typically in their 50s. Were most of them. There were a few that were in their 30s, 40s, but most of them were in their 50s.
I could just see. You could just see the wheels turn their head. This cute blonde comes in, 6 foot tall, sits down, and is interested in me. I mean,
tell me more.
That's what I say. Put me in jail. Put the cuffs on me right now. Just take me to jail because I'm an idiot.
Yeah. No, they love to talk. I mean, our interviews would go on, and I had to always send a pizza to the parking lot because the agents would be like, "Seriously, Susannah, it's been 4 hours and you're still interviewing the doctor?" I'm like, "I'm sending pizza. It's fine." And then we'd bring pizza in for the doctors because I never wanted them to say that they were being held against their will, right? So we're bringing pizza in and finding out everything we need.
Well, and I'm looking at the article. This I don't even know. Was this LA Times? Maybe I'm guessing.
Yeah, probably.
That this came out of. And actually, I was able to pull this one up because I was going to pull another one up, and then I got the notice from LA Times they wanted me to buy a subscription from them. They'd only give me one free one, so that's why I only have the one. But I'm showing in 2008 alone, just on the sale of hydrocodone, the guy made more than $700,000. And for our listeners, by cutting out the pharmacy, there is no middleman. Right. He's making all the money. Nobody else is making anything from this.
Right. And there's no overhead. It's just the rent of the building and people coming in and out.
Greedy bastard. They said one guy, and I love the name of his clinic. Do you remember the name of it?
Which
Kind Care Medical Center?
Kind Care, yes. Yes, the Kind Care. You want to make sure that it's kind, right?
It says the police pulled over one guy who came out of the clinic shortly after leaving, and he had a dozen commercial-sized bottles of Vicodin and 3 containers of Xanax, 7,500 pills in all. And I'm bitching about the doctor giving me 60.
Well, and that happens. We were working with the Monrovia local police department, was working in conjunction, which we did a lot on these cases with the local police department. So we sat out there and had the local police do traffic stops. And that's how. And I remember them calling me going, "Well, we got a whole bag of the big white bottles." And I'm like, "Well, that can't be for real." And sure enough.
And it even shocked you.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, and there's a couple more things I want to point out, just because this guy, I read this about him, and he could be a training case, I guess, in the academy. And so the California Medical Board should be held accountable for some of this, I think, because they had successive terms of probation they put this guy on after accusations of incompetence, dishonesty, fraudulent billing, aiding and abetting the unlicensed practice of medicine, unprofessional conduct. And he was actually on probation when you guys got him. for dealing drugs. I mean, people need to be held accountable.
That accountable word you just said, most of, not all, but the vast majority of the pill mill cases I did, the doctors all had prior actions with their state medical for similar types of things. And that was one of the first things that I looked at because it was an indicator. And one of them had, I think, 17 prior actions.
Wow.
And it's like, at what point are they going to be held accountable and not keep getting extra chances?
Right.
And it drove me crazy because I was like, okay, today's going to be the day because we're not doing a probation. We're not going to give you a chance. And a lot of the times the doctor, part of their defense or what they would say is, well, if she would just came in and talked to me, I would have stopped doing this. We're not the Drug Education Administration. You know, like I'm not going to come in and chit chat with you about your drug dealing. That's not my job. My job's to enforce Title 21, to keep you from harming the community, not say, hey, let's stop it so that you can do it again 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
And so there was really, they were just very offended because they'd gotten so many chances from the medical board that they never expect that this isn't going to be another chance. That no, today it is, and you're going to federal prison. And a lot of these doctors, Healy, and all of them, we got them detained pending trial because of the danger to the community.
Oh, outstanding. And that's, our regular listeners are educated on why people don't get bond. There's only 2 reasons: danger to the community and danger of flight risk.
Yep. And we got the doctors on the danger to the community almost every time.
That's outstanding. That's outstanding.
I love those detention hearings.
It's, I'm not even going to waste my time talking about his defense attorney's claims. It just makes you sick. But here's the sad part of this whole thing. This doctor had kids. And so his kids brought friends over. And they've found, what do you call him, Dr. Happy or?
Candyman.
Candyman. He ought to be called Dr. Easy. But these kids realized that he was willing to sell them too.
Yes.
Sell to these teenagers.
Yes. That's what teenagers, young adults, I mean, it just, the destruction and the overdose deaths that happened.
Exactly.
It's just.
I think a fitting punishment for this, and people will know that I'm a hawk and not a dove when it comes to this kind of stuff. I think a fitting punishment would be just put him in an auditorium with the families of people that overdosed on the pills that he gave out.
Yes.
And do what you will with him.
Yeah, the victims at trials and sentencings, that's what I could hardly stand to be in the courtroom to hear those victim statements. And you go through the whole process with them. But even though they have that kind of little bit of resolution, it never goes away.
No.
Their child will never be back. Their loved one will never be back. And they lost them at the hands of someone that took an oath to do no.
Yeah.
Nothing's worse than that.
We're both parents. I can't, just God bless the parents that do lose children. And we see what's going on today in excess of 100,000 overdose deaths.
Yes.
Whether you call them overdose deaths or poisonings or whatever you call them. And I could get on my soapbox real quick on what I think we should do here in our country to help prevent this. I think there's several things, but one is accountability again. And my heart just bleeds. I can't imagine losing one of my children. I've got 4 kids, got 5 grandkids. I would probably end up in I don't know, in some kind of medical facility if that ever happens, because your kids aren't supposed to die before the parents die, in my book. And I know I'm an old fart, but that's just the way I think. And it's just for him doing that right in his home, because his own children brought their friends in and they're like, hey, Dr. Happy or whatever, hey, Dr. Jackass is what he is.
And it was that enabling, and they want to be cool to their kids' friends. And ultimately they led to death and destruction. And it's the amount of families that were impacted.
And this article, so, go on LinkedIn and check out Susannah here. And we're not at the end here by any means, but if you can read one of these articles, I mean, you had parents that were of these children who were addicted going to the doctor and saying, please, please quit prescribing medications to my child. I don't know that I would have the wherewithal to not smack the dog shit right out of him that was doing that to one of my children.
I'll tell you this one, since we're coming up on the Christmas season, it was a wife of somebody who was going to this clinic that got down on all hands and knees, literally put her hands around my ankle and begged me to do something. And it was right around the Christmas season. We had 1,000 cases going on, right? This wasn't even on my radar. And when she told me the story, it was, I ran a few, data points and was like, this is unbelievable. And that was right before Christmas. And we executed our search warrants and arrested him in February. and the beginning of February, which is pretty fast for one of these cases. But it was that sense of, that desperate, like I can't get the doctor to stop. No one will stop him. My husband, the father of my 4 children, is going to die because this doctor will not quit giving these controlled substances. And this woman had brought in bags of trash bags to me of empty pill bottles that he had thrown in the gutter around his house because he was trying to hide his addiction. That's how powerful that addiction is. It owned him. And so she had over 300 of these bottles that she brought in black trash bags to me and begged me to do something. At that point, I was like, okay, this is what we're doing on Christmas Eve, guys. So let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It made you really popular in the group, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. Super popular. Everybody's working over Christmas this year. No use or lose.
My gosh. I just want to say right now, if you are suffering from addiction, from stress, from anxiety, from PTSD, whatever the key word is that you're suffering from, don't think that you have to go through all this alone. There's help out there. There's a national crisis hotline in our country. All you have to do is dial 988. That's it, 988. You can text them. They're open 24/7, 365, which means they're always there. Now, the person you talk to may not be a counselor, but they will listen to your issue and then they will put you in touch with somebody immediately that can help you. Okay, and I'll mention this again towards the end. And Susannah, if I forget, please help me remember. But that's how important this is that we put this out. There's always help available. 988. Just remember that number, 988. Call or text, all right? So that was in L.A. where this doctor was. You're in Dallas. And I know South Florida was very popular for its pain mills back in the day. I told Billy that when I was there at the OSDEF Fusion Center, and even before that, for less than a year, I was running the Office of Special Intelligence, which was all classified. But we were there in conjunction with the OSDEF Fusion Center. I would bring in a speaker every quarter just to talk to employees and, give you a little distraction and maybe have some snacks for everybody, things like that. And one of the people I brought up was one of the case agents from a pill mill case in Miami. And I was shocked. It was, I mean, he was even going in undercover, and I don't want to beat a dead horse because we talked about this on Billy's interview, but he was going in and one time he went in, he told the doctor, he said, I'm addicted to these pills. And the doctor's like, well, okay, I'm going to give you one more, but you got to go get help. I'm going to give you one more prescription of like 300 pills. It wasn't like 10 or 60. It was just amazing what you heard. And then we saw that the pill mills were a real issue in Texas as well. And I'm going to guess that's what you had to deal with a lot in Dallas. Is that right?
Absolutely. I spent a lot of time in Florida. So I was temporary assigned to Florida during, Operation Pill Nation. So it's what you were talking about, where we sent agents in literally every day. There was a pill mill on every corner, 7-Eleven pill mill every corner. We just sent undercovers in like crazy there. And same thing in Dallas. We had quite a few pill mills we were working, but when you talked about it, it reminded me about going in and saying they were addicted. This is not a medical transaction. There's no health evaluation, and I think that's important because what I would send undercovers to use as their, history or documentation that they needed this. One of them in Texas, I sent them in with a note from Dr. Kevorkian, and I just made up Dr. Kevorkian, and then I wrote the rap music to Dr. Dre's rap music on one of the documents they took in. And I did that intentionally because knowing this would probably go to trial or there would be hearings. And the doctor's like, well, I can't prescribe this to you without documentation. They hand the documentation over. It goes in the patient file, but it's the rap music.
Well, shows you he never read it.
They never read them.
Yeah.
They don't go over them. And I also sent undercovers in with my dog's x-ray. And so there's a tail on there. Humans don't have tails, right? And so
I love it.
Those were really fun when they went to trial and they're like, well, Ms. Herkert, can you, show what this exhibit is? Well, yes, that is an x-ray of my dog that I sent in with my undercover for evidence of their back pain. And so there were some really fun moments in trial, especially like, can you read the note that you sent them in? Well, it's from Dr. Kevorkian. It gave kind of that comedic relief in some very intense, subjects, but it also just showed these are not the doctors that you go to for treatment and provide legitimate care on a day in and day out basis and save lives. That is not at all what we're talking about. We are talking about people who went to medical school, completely violated their oath, and are now just drug dealers. There's a massive difference. And this is the 0.01%, and then all of the phenomenal doctors. And that's what I wanted it to be clear. There's no semblance of actual medical care going on.
Yeah. And there's no difference between doctors doing that and these scumbags that are out there dealing meth, coke, and heroin, and all fentanyl, every other thing the cartels. They're the same level as the cartel members.
Yeah, and everybody's charged under the same Title 21, 841, unlawful distribution and conspiracy. Doctors are charged under that as well.
Yep. All right. So now let's see if I got the date in here. In 2018, you were tasked to leave Dallas, weren't you?
Yes. Yes.
So tell us how that came about. I mean, I know how it came about. If you listen to Billy's episode, you know how it came about.
You know, Bill had already left Dallas and he was like, hey, we need somebody to stand up this new unit at Quantico, and eventually you're going to promote. And I was one of those that was like, no, I'm at 13. I love doing the cases. You will never convince me to promote. I like being on the streets, and you need me on that wall. And, you know, I was famous for, you know, digging my heels into the ground and saying, I just want to be a case agent or a case investigator for my career. And you know, there were several agents and people that really started saying, no, you really should consider promoting. No, wasn't going to do it. And then the Quantico specialized unit, which was criminal focused on how to do these investigations. And they were like, if you don't stand it up, I mean, you can't control the curriculum that's going to be going out throughout the country and have that impact. And so it was everybody kind of planting those seeds, and it just makes sense. And so I transferred out to Quantico and got to be that first unit chief for that diversion specialized, and just got to put together all of the things that people had given to me throughout my career, and that old guard and old school from Los Angeles, and go-bys and those trials and the affidavits and the experience into these courses to share with federal prosecutors throughout the country and agents and investigators. And so it was just a labor of love, and it was kind of a perfect way to end out my career.
So that when along the line, when did you become qualified as an expert witness?
That was in Los Angeles. So
that's relatively in the first part of your career then.
Yeah. I was thrown in the deep end, and I had had so many criminal investigations those first couple of years just by, it's like a conveyor, right, of getting through them. And I had some great prosecutors that really threw me out there, and I was terrified to testify. The first time they put me on the stand, I just remember that pit in the stomach, the clammy hands, being terrified of what was going to happen. And a prosecutor once told me, well, if you ever lose that feeling, that pit in your stomach, when you get up and raise your right hand, it's time to stop testifying. So every time I testify, I do that gut check. Am I still nervous? Yes. Then it's okay. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good kind of caliber because it's such an important thing to do, to raise your right hand, and to take that oath and to seek that justice. And, right. And I never wanted to lose that importance. But yeah, so in LA, I got stipulated in federal court out there as an expert in pharmaceuticals as well as drug diversion investigations, and then continued on doing that in other judicial districts. And so it's kind of that kind of word of mouth. Hey, we use Susannah, you want to try? And so a lot of prosecutors in other districts just started using me because they didn't have to go through all of that, background, because I'd already been stipulated as an expert. So I started testifying in Alabama and Northern California and Texas and just West Virginia and federal judicial districts throughout the United States doing that expert work.
That's fantastic. That's what I've already covered. There are not a lot of expert witnesses. That's definitely the exception, not the norm.
Yeah, it's something that I wouldn't say I enjoy doing. I don't know of anyone who truly enjoys cross-examination. Maybe some do, but I really just believe in it. I believe in the importance of it. And so I was like, I'm going to put myself out there, and I've lost trials. I've had juries hang on counts, but I'd be mad at myself for not trying.
Yeah.
And not being able to look at those victims' families and saying I was too scared to try. So I was like, we're going to try and see what happens.
Yeah. And you're being part of the team, and you're serving the public as a public servant.
Absolutely.
I love it. And then at Quantico, I mean, I read I guess somewhat of a bio I found on you that you basically wrote the book on these type of investigations in this new training unit, and then you became the head of the unit that trained all future diversion investigators.
Yeah, we trained kind of that criminal aspect. Our focus in our group was to train kind of what I had. We got to train agents, investigators, analysts, and prosecutors to work together to do these, because it truly is that team effort, and sharing with them kind of how we did that, our investigative techniques, process from everything from how to build the investigation. We came up with, models and table of contents, right? Search warrants and all of the different things to share and give go-bys, because these were challenging cases. And I think a lot of prosecutors just didn't have the background in these investigations, as we gave them the toolkits. And we taught them how to investigate them and then ultimately prosecute them. You go to grand jury and the whole process together. And it was just a great few years to watch the cases that were indicted and then made it through the system.
That's excellent that DEA is offering to train the prosecutors.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the prosecutors all came. They were all, we had waiting lists for prosecutors to come to these. And so they were very interested in it.
I'll bet you did. And so you left DEA in 2020, is that correct?
Yes.
And why did you leave DEA? Those time was up?
Yeah, I had a full career. I kind of joked that it was like dog years almost. But no, it was like I only did 15 years, but no, I had a full career. Towards the end of my career, I was targeting some pretty big corporations that were associated with film mills. I had a lot of time at Maine Justice, and I really felt like I hit that kind of pinnacle of, hey, this is great. Tons of people have invested in me. I've done a lot of work here, and I want to do something different. And so they said, hey, have you ever considered consulting? And I knew I didn't want to go work for a specific DEA registrant or something like that. And so consulting was almost like the perfect next step, because it allowed me to dabble in training and instruction and investigations and kind of be more on the proactive side of the drug diversion. And I did a lot of, what they say, cleanup, like we already have 10 overdose deaths, and working with the coroner's office and doing a lot of that, to where it's like, now I get to be on the front end to hopefully where it doesn't get to that point. It's been a nice transition.
I don't know if you can say the name of the company you work for now. If you don't want to, that's fine too.
Yeah, I'm Guidepost Solutions right now.
And that's where Billy might be working there, huh?
Yep. We have a little DEA team here.
Yeah. It sounds a little bit incestuous, to be quite honest with you. And her position there is she's just not a consultant. She's a senior managing director. Okay. You don't get that title when you first get on a job. That's something you have to earn. Do you still get called back to DEA to do anything?
I still do expert testimony. So I get called by DOJ to do expert testimony, sometimes in criminal cases. I've still have done that in a consultant role. And so that's something that I've turned on. I kind of joke that I do the same thing in the private sector, what I did in DEA a lot with the investigations and helping people become compliant.
I bet you're making a little bit more money than you made with the
government.
I'm
making a little bit more.
Yeah. That's not a bad thing.
Right? Kids have their private sport lessons. We got to pay for it.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing what goes on in real life with our kids, how much we're willing to give to them. And you were, now I'm not going to mention the company here, but you mentioned that you were working with DOJ against some of the biggest corporations in the United States. And if our listeners are interested in that, you can do your research and find out which one it was. When you mentioned that to me, you sent me that email, I was shocked. I'll be honest with you. I was very shocked at that. But it just shows you, I'm sure the corporate leadership was not aware that was going on with some of their facilities. Maybe they were. I don't know. But I was shocked at that corporation. So we'll leave it at that. We don't want to say any more here. We certainly don't want to point out a company. These doctors that were convicted, no problem pointing them out. I mean, they're criminals. So
right.
I saw where you were recognized in your activities over the years through awards and recognition. I saw Agent of the Year from the U.S. Attorney's Office in California and Texas. That's pretty significant.
I think they were confused, though. I was like, no, I wasn't a DEA agent, but I still got put on their plaque. But I was like, you probably should put Diversion Investigator. Fuck that.
Yeah. You know what? It's the point that you were recognized. Yeah. To recognize the quality of the work that you were doing. You had like a dozen DEA performance awards. And even in Dallas in 2015, you got the Dallas Field Division Diversion Investigator of the Year Award. These aren't things to laugh at. We don't go into these jobs for recognition. You certainly don't go into them for the money. If you think you're going into law enforcement, come out wealthy, you might want to do a little more research before you make that final decision. And I'll be real honest with you, keynote speaking pays a whole lot more than being a DEA agent, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. But it's so nice when you do get the recognition. And it's not something to take lightly.
All the
So,
families that have stayed in touch with me throughout the years.
oh,
That's just been incredible. And everyone, people have said, well, isn't it hard to remember everything? I do know, because it's great to stay in touch with them and know the impact that these cases being taken down and then rebuilding their lives. And a lot of these families are now out there advocating and talking to Congress and really putting a face to the destruction caused by pill mills and these pharmaceuticals that are illicitly distributed. That's been so rewarding. And yeah, as I mentioned to you, I had a phenomenal DEA career, and I'm so glad it was the accidental, career I landed on. But just, as I tell everyone, I never had a bad day in my career. I had hard days. I had a lot of hard days, but I never had a single bad day.
Oh, that's outstanding to hear. I like the little saying that says, if you find a job you like, you'll never work a day in your life.
Exactly. So true.
You and I found that job.
Yes.
I still love it. I still get excited when we go to law enforcement conferences and the guys, and when I say guys, it's all inclusive, guys and gals both. But when they start telling you about cases, that investigative side of you comes back out. And you start asking questions. Well, did you do this? Have you done that? How are you going to handle this investigation? And they're looking at you like, oh man, we know what we're doing here.
Yes.
But
I'm like, can I help? Can I help?
Yeah. And they're very gracious. They don't call me that, but I'm sure when I walk away, they're like, this old bastard, he still thinks he's on the job. So you live vicariously through what other people do here.
Right.
We're coming up on the end of the interview here, and I'm just curious. Well, one question I want to ask you, if you would agree with this. I mean, we speak to different groups, and we don't say this at every group, but if I'm given the opportunity to talk about what's going on with our overdose problem here in the United States, and I've said this on Fox, I've said it on Newsmax, on some of the different networks that we get to talk on, they'll call and ask our opinions about things. When people say, well, that opioid addiction, that overdose addiction we're having in the United States, that doesn't affect me, that doesn't affect my family. What I tell them is, if that's what you believe, you better take another look. Maybe not your immediate family. I've got an immediate family member who's an opioid addict. We deal with that. What I tell them is, you need to take another look at your family and your circle, because I'm 99.9% sure if you can dig down far enough, you're going to find out it is an issue. Would you agree to that?
100%. And I think it's even more than that too, in that I can't tell you how many times, because we do a lot of investigations now as consultants that involve overdose deaths, involving, unfortunately, practitioners and individuals working in hospitals and other medical facilities. And time again, we hear that we never would have guessed that individual had an addiction issue. We never would have guessed that person. And there's just people, I think, assume that you can just tell by looking at someone whether they're struggling with addiction or not. And it's not always the case. Sometimes it is, but it's not. And so this absolutely impacts everyone. It's from addiction and the people that are addicted that you don't know about, but it's also about, I can't tell you how many times, there were individuals involved in car accidents, leaving, these clinics that are getting these controlled substances. And so then those people become victims by being hit by someone that's under the influence of these controlled substances. And it impacts the entire community, and everyone's impacted. And you absolutely, I have a very small family, and I don't know anyone personally within my family that struggles with this, but I have friends and people that I know that do. And so it hits everyone.
Yeah, it's all inclusive. It doesn't play favorites. Am I going to get addicted to Crestor? I doubt it very seriously. I don't know if I doubt it's an addictive drug, but I just don't like taking it. I don't want to take a chance.
That we talked about was just his addiction is, I think, what caused him to be a pill mill doctor. Doc Hollywood, one of the cases in Los Angeles that we arrested him, he was under the influence.
Wow.
And suffering with it. It doesn't
Folks,
discriminate.
take a stance on what you believe in. If you think it's wrong, take a stance, get involved with the group, let your voice be heard. I mean, you look at, I don't know if you ever knew or worked with Derek Maltz. He's a real legend within DEA, and you see the things that he's doing now. He seems to be a regular on the Dr. Phil show. He's gotten involved in some things that Dr. Phil is supporting Derek on his movement. Derek is very close to the victims of fentanyl, the families, and he's always, I mean, you can follow him on social media just about every day. He is seriously involved in trying to bring awareness to this. I think he was very instrumental in bringing in the DEA headquarters there on the first floor. where they have photographs of the victims of fentanyl, of overdose deaths. They've run out of space.
Yes.
Yeah, we're talking in excess of 100,000 people a year dying in our country. Again, this is not directed at the legitimate people who suffer from legitimate pain. That's certainly not an accusation or pointing the finger at you. But if we're going to overcome this, we all got to get involved. It's remember the old saying that it takes a village to raise a child?
Yes.
Well, we're at that point here in our country, because think of this comparison. What if a commercial airplane carrying 350 passengers crashed every day in our country, every single day? What would our reaction be? Because we see what happens when one plane crashes a year. It's there's outrage, there's investigations. Well, that's the equivalent of how many Americans we're losing every day to this overdose epidemic. And yet, I mean, Javier and I, we went up on Capitol Hill twice before COVID, once with the Senate side, once with the House side, to talk about counterfeit medications. And then we even got to speak to the American Legislative Exchange Conference. Wow. There wasn't a soul that knew that was even an issue. And these are the people who are supposed to be creating the laws to protect us. So push your legislators to do their jobs, to get off their butts, to become aware. They have staffers that are supposed to stay up with things like that, to keep them informed so they can address these type of issues. It's more common to find somebody that knows about it now, but that's what I like about having Susannah on here. She's not somebody that said somebody needs to do something. She's somebody that stepped up to the plate and she did something to protect all of us. Just before we sign off here, Susannah, any parting thoughts, any parting words you'd like to leave us with here, any words of wisdom?
No, I love what you just said. And as I tell a lot of the groups that I speak to, it's going to take a grassroots effort. It's you going to your kids' school. It's you going to your community center and educating. Don't wait for some head of DEA Derek Moltz, what he's done is phenomenal in getting the word out there. But everyone, it takes a guidance counselor to say, we're going to pass out this information. We're going to educate the parents, because I can't tell you how many parents I sat across from that had an overdose death and said, well, we knew they were taking prescription pills, but we didn't think it was that dangerous. And so the education and getting out there and that grassroots effort is the only thing that's going to turn this around. And I'm just nobody, but that's my opinion, is getting out there and talking about it every chance you get. You have vending machines off the highway that have Narcan in them.
Oh,
when I drove back into Oklahoma and I stopped off the turnpike and there was a vending machine for Narcan, where you just enter your zip code and it will give you Narcan. So if we're in a state where we need vending machines with Narcan to reverse an overdose, that tells you that we have to get out there, every single person, and start talking about it.
Yeah. That's it. Not to get off on a political tangent here, but this is other countries interfering with our country, trying to bring us down. And I truly do believe that. So whether you believe it or not, that's your right to believe whatever you want to believe. But it does take us all. We got to go to Houston one time and speak at a conference, and I loved what Houston was doing. They had teamed together with DEA and law enforcement, but the entire community was in there. They bring us in more for entertainment than anything else. We tell the Escobar story, what really happened, and talk about narcos and all that. But here you saw the faith-based community, you saw your government leaders, you saw law enforcement, you saw the medical community, the hospitals, you saw the housewives and the community groups, the civic groups, all getting involved together to try to come up with maybe not a catch-all solution, not a 100% solution, but at least to address the issue and what can we do better to improve our community. And I was so impressed with that.
Yes.
And I don't know that it's still ongoing because this was before COVID also, but that's what it's going to take. That's what it's going to take.
Absolutely what it's going to take.
And accountability. I love that word, accountability.
Me too. Word of the day, accountability.
So, Susannah, I can't tell you what a pleasure it's been to have you on here. Thank you so much for your time. You did not hesitate. When Billy introduced us, you didn't hesitate to say yes, to come on the show, to educate our listeners, to talk more about diversion. We just got such a positive response from everybody about his interview, and I know his is more from a supervisory point of view as well as the rest of his agent career. And this is straight out diversion. And I want to say before we leave here, don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, if you need help, 988. Just call it, text it. That's our national suicide crisis hotline here in the United States. 988. Get the help you need. You don't have to face any of this alone. These people, they got to justify their job. So if you need help, let them help you, right? Susannah, again, thank you very much. God bless for what you've done and what you're continuing to do. I like the fact that we take oaths, and I like this little saying that as corny as it could be because I coined it, but just because we retired does not mean that our oaths ever expired.
That is so true.
You're
Thank
continuing
you for what you do.
Well, I'm having fun is what I'm doing. But you're continuing to live up on that oath, and that's very honorable. All right. So, everybody, thank you again for joining us here on Game of Crimes with Murph in the Morning. This is the end of this interview, but I'm going to bring another stud or studette in here for next week. So, come back and join us next week. Until then, God bless. Well, unfortunately, that's it for this week's episode of Game of Crimes with Murph in the Morning. Thank you, folks, so much for taking the time to see and hear some of the best true crime content you can find anywhere. None of this would be possible without your support. If you didn't know this already, Game of Crimes is now on YouTube. Just type in Game of Crimes Podcast in the YouTube search bar. You can send me your comments on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or to our email address, which is gameofcrimespodcast@gmail.com. Our website, it's gameofcrimespodcast.com. That's where you'll find all our episodes, books written by our guests, merchandise, and more. If you're looking for even more content, now go over to patreon.com/gameofcrimes and sign up. There you'll find several bonus episodes each month, ranging from serious and current topics to some silly and fun events. And you can even get early access to each week's interviews before they drop on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can even subscribe for free and hear the first 5 minutes of each episode, and that's to help you decide if you'd like to spend some of your hard-earned cash to hear more. That's patreon.com/gameofcrimes. To all our guests here on Game of Crimes, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show. I mean that sincerely. Thank you for your service to your communities, your countries, and for taking the time to tell us about your adventurous lives. May God bless and protect all the men and women in law enforcement, our military, and all of our first responders. And you know what? This goes for all of our listeners as well. Thank you for your continued support. And just one last thought here. It's okay for us to have different ideas and different opinions, but it doesn't mean we can't continue to be friends. All right, my final thank you. Thanks for joining me again to play the biggest, the baddest, the most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes. I'll see y'all next week.